When I first started teaching, I was always so nervous about calling parents about a student behavioral issue. And chances are that you clicked on this video because you might feel that same way too. So if that's the case, don't worry, because I have some time-tested methods that should make it a little bit easier for you to feel confident and ready to make that call. Hello, Time Crunch teachers. Marielle here. And when I first started teaching, I was like 22 and was calling folks old enough to be my actual parents. So now that I'm 42, I'm calling people that I like went to high school with. So it's a completely different vibe, and it's actually probably a little harder because I'm calling people about things that, we did when we were in school. Now I have their kid. I'm like, oh, remember that thing we used to do? Yeah, well, your kid's doing it too. Before I dive into the method I use when I call families, I want to give you some advice. And that is that I hope that this is not the first time you're contacting the parents. It's a lot easier to have a challenging conversation about a student's behavior if you have already established some positive rapport ahead of time. So if you're curious what that might look like, I've included some links to videos where I go over some ways that I do that at the beginning of the school year. But if this is the first time you're contacting the students' families, no big deal. It is what it is. I also wanted to add that I personally tend to call home the first time for behaviors that might seem a little lower level than what other teachers might consider like calling home worthy. And the reason why is because I want to work with the families on preventative measures before something like really big happens. It's all about establishing expectations early before something major occurs. And I also tell the kids, like, hey, I'm going to be contacting your parents about this so that we can figure out how to resolve it as a team, because it's important that your family knows what's going on so that we can all work together. Because if the kid knows that you're actually going to follow through with that, then it makes it a lot easier for them to follow your expectations the next time they need a reminder in class. Before you call, what you need to do is think about the conversation you're about to have with the parents as information gathering and bridge building. The family knows the student the best, so it's a great opportunity to gain some insight into what the student's motives might be. And the parents might have some really good tips on how to address issues with their kid. The point is, you're not just calling and dropping some negative thing on them and hoping that they deal with it. You're working together to figure out how to support the kid and figure out next steps. Okay, here we go. When I call a parent or guardian, I like to jump in right away by identifying exactly who I am, who the student is, and most importantly, I ask if this is a good time to talk. Chances are you're calling folks during the school day, which means they're probably at work. So don't assume you can launch into a long conversation about their kid. After I've confirmed that it's a good time to chat, I like to go straight to the issue. I know that some people like to use the compliment sandwich, which is basically a technique where you start with a compliment about their kid, like how great they're doing in class, and then you share the problem or, maybe more difficult news, and then you try to end with something positive about the kid. And the reason why I don't like this is because parents know what's coming. And if you're trying to soften the blow by telling them something bad their kid did, by going on and on about how great they're doing in class, I feel like the motive feels a little transparent. And as a parent myself, when I get those phone calls, I'm not totally listening to the good things about my kid. I'm sorry, but I am just waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? And that it's coming. Plus, I do make phone calls where I say positive things about children or I give an update about something that's really great. And I don't want families to be conditioned that means I'm also going to add in something negative. So I try to keep those things, a little separate. Of course, I'm friendly and cordial and everything when I get on the phone. I just don't feel like it's necessary to front load with a bunch of positive things. I think it's much more effective to just go straight to why you're calling. It's also important to remember, you're calling these people at work or in the middle of their day, so they might not have a lot of time to speak. Also, hopefully you've already had some positive interactions with them at the beginning of the year and have established a rapport or sense of trust between the school and home. So that's just a really long way of me saying that after I confirm that they have time to talk, I jump right into the issue and I try to use facts with very little value judgment or assumptions. And if possible, I try to be brief. So it might sound something like this. Today, during recess, your son told another student that he didn't want to be their friend anymore because he said that that friend made their team lose the game that they were playing. And later, your son passed that friend a note that said, and at this point, I'm very clear about what the student said. Of course, to maintain professionalism, you might not want to like swear over the phone if the kid said a swear word, but you could certainly explain the phrase. Just be sure you're not using euphemisms like naughty word or too many value judgments like they said something really, really mean and super hurtful. That could very well be true. Like the kid who was on the receiving end could have felt that way. But what's most important is that you just communicate the facts so that you can work with the parent on a solution. And I've personally found that if I try to dance around the issue or the words, it can lead to some confusion because the parent will end up saying like, well, what did they say? Or what exactly did they do? And it's easier just to be really clear and repeat it. Another thing I do is I make sure that I don't mention the names of other students involved. So I might say something like another student at school or one of their friends or one of their classmates, that sort of thing. I do this to maintain student confidentiality and to help focus the conversation on the student whose parent or guardian I'm calling, not on all the characters involved in the situation. Of course, that doesn't mean that the kid won't tell them or that they can't figure it out, but I try my best to focus on the student that's at hand. After I've relayed the situation, next I like to ask the parent something like, I'm curious if you have seen this behavior before or is it a new development? I like to ask this because I don't know. What I'm calling about might be a total shock to the family, or maybe it's an established pattern and they've seen it before. The important part is that I make no assumptions about the student. Remember, the focus of the conversation is information gathering and bridging. Of course, it's totally okay to share things that you've tried, maybe to dissuade the behavior, if you've seen it before in class. That way the parent knows that you've tried a few things before immediately calling them. However, since the parents know the kids better than I do, they are often the ones who have the history and advice that can be really helpful in helping me to navigate the situation with their kid. Which is why my next question is, do you have any suggestions for how, the student responds best to this type of situation? Meaning, is there anything that I can do to help support them when this type of thing occurs? If the answer is no to this question, then this is where the teamwork comes in. If they've never seen this behavior before, maybe they still have some insight. So maybe there's something significant going on in the student's life, or maybe they're going through a hardship or challenge. Any sort of insight the family can provide can be super helpful, and it's the perfect time to collaborate together because as the teacher, you should be prepared with, 2 or 3 options that you think could benefit the student. That way, maybe that can give the family some ideas, or maybe they have some ideas and you can come up with some possible solutions. It's also helpful to collaborate on what the next steps or even consequences should be, because maybe the student would benefit from a quick check-in with a school counselor, or perhaps the student just needs a one-on-one conversation and time to talk with you, the teacher. And yeah, they're probably going to need to figure out a way to make amends or have a maybe teacher-led restorative conversation. Whatever the both of you think would be a good outcome for the situation and serve as a teachable moment for the student. After the conversation is done, I like to thank them for their time and let them know that I'll be following up with them in a week or so after I've had a chance to implement the steps that we discussed. And maybe that's all that's needed and the student changes the behavior, which is awesome. Call the family, let them know that. And even if the student didn't quite respond to the intervention, then it's a great opportunity to meet and collaborate with the family on maybe a more robust support plan. Either way, the parent needs to know how things are progressing. Also, if the student has more than one parent or guardian, be sure to call both. It's not always noted if the student lives in more than one household or if the parents are separated or divorced. So I found that it's good to cover your bases and just call all the parents or guardians that are listed on the student info sheet. Every now and then, a parent will mention that they'll contact the other parent, but even so, I like to do my follow-up, that's a week later. I like to include all the parents or guardians in that just to make sure that all the information is communicated. One last thing, I'll be sure to link the phone call template in the description box below, but please know that it's just that, a template. You can certainly change it to suit your needs or just ditch it altogether if you'd prefer to have a more free-flowing conversation. But if it's the first time you've ever called a parent, it's a good place to start and you can modify it for your needs. If you're watching this video because you've just entered the teaching field, then check out this playlist geared specifically towards providing new teachers with tips around topics like classroom management, organization, and lesson planning. And most of the videos I filmed before I got braces, so you could probably actually understand what I'm saying.